Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's NKBA KBIS design webinar, All Hail the Hue, Harnessing Color in Kitchen and Bath Design. As we continue our theme of the design and build process for the month of June, I'd like to welcome today's speaker, Tressa Samdel, Director of Trends and Innovations at CabinetWorks Group. Tressa, please take it away.
Thank you all for joining me today on All Hail the Hue. I love talking about color. It's emotional, it's transformative, and this is a really exciting time to be part of kitchen design and bath design as we look at color and as consumers really start to embrace it. As just a quick little housekeeping, all images included in this presentation are either owned or property licensed by CabinetWorks Group. These images are solely for the use within this training session and may not be reproduced, distributed, or used for any other purpose without prior written permission from CabinetWorks Group. So let's start about why color sells. The right hue can close the deal. And why is that? First impression starts with color. Before customers notice door styles, patterns, or material, color is the first element they emotionally react to. It creates an instant connection or disinterest. Visual shortcuts also appear in terms of creating personal style. So color often reflects identity and aspiration, whether it's a classic white kitchen or something a little bit more trend forward. It really plays into individual personalities. And then before we design and before the pattern, really color is the most important part. We know research has done many studies about this, and it shows that color is often the deciding factor. I know many of you have experienced this yourself when we were in the heavy white and gray period. If you didn't have the right white, if you didn't have the blue white, or the warm white, or the warm gray, it was very frustrating for customers. So sometimes it's like Goldilocks, trying to find the color that's just right. And then color creates confidence. So a well-chosen palette really helps buyers visualize the finished space. And it eliminates hesitation, or at least reduces it. And then sometimes it can speed up the decision-making as well. So today we're going to learn how to use color to sell, design, and kitchen and bath. So color is no longer intimidating. It is really an exciting time to be in the kitchen and bath design world because homeowners are really embracing color for the first time. They want to feel something in their space. They want color to be expressive. And why is now the time to embrace color choices? Well, there's a couple of things. There's a shift in mindset. We were in a very dominant neutral space for a very long time. And the reason for that is because most homeowners really only live in their homes for 3 to 5 years because they're thinking about that resale factor. And that's why we were heavily in this neutral space. But now people are staying in their homes for a much longer period of time, unlike our European counterparts who pass on their homes to their children and then also their children's children. They really aren't thinking about selling the house. They're thinking about personalizing it. And then we're at a time of design maturity. Customers are better educated and more design savvy than they've ever been before. And then emotional impact. Color can invoke joy, calm, energy, and people are wanting to really start creating spaces that they can feel in. And as I mentioned before, more people are staying in place, and with that comes the desire to personalize. Then, of course, there is some cultural drivers where people are really thinking through a renewed appreciation of craftsmanship, storytelling. There's a lot of new retro palettes that are being reimagined that allow for statement hues. So it's really a great time to be involved in color with kitchen and bath design. So let's talk about the shift in mindset. We were in a period of grayish. We still are a little bit where we have the neutral colors and we continue on and we have the gray and the warming tones, but we're seeing a greater shift to those warming tones. We're also seeing the younger generations, like the millennials, buying their first home, and they are not as afraid of color as their parents. and the boomers, the Gen Xers. So we're definitely seeing this new embracing of color as these younger generations start redecorating their homes. And then these younger generations from Gen X and below grew up with HGTV, social media, home influencers, and it's really created this trust in their instincts to make good color choices. Cultural drivers, as I mentioned, there's also a new desire for heritage. We're seeing a lot of retro colors, the desire for storytelling, unique pieces, unique palettes to create a really much more deeper, meaningful space. So it's really an exciting time to be involved in kitchen and bath design when it comes to color. And then also there's the desire to have a space that reflects our own personal expression. As I mentioned, people are staying in place. This is due to the rising housing costs and also, of course, the high interest rates. So as people are staying in their homes, when boomers were thinking about downsizing and now not downsizing, instead staying in place, this may be their last home. So they're really thinking about, how can I create a place that I love? And millennials moving into these homes with those lower fixed interest rates are really thinking about, this is the home that I'm going to have for a long time. How can I make it best for me? And then, of course, like I mentioned before, the emotional impact. So color is more than aesthetic. It really creates, like I mentioned before, yellows can create a joyful space. Greens can be grounding. It can create a haven for your customers. So it's really exciting. And as the younger generations who are not as afraid of color or even reacting to this over neutralization that we have these dark, powerful colors. I've heard the term many a time that there's actually blogs for millennials that say, I'm a recovering millennial beiger for the Instagram followers, or I'm a millennial recovering grazier. So I'm definitely seeing this shift. And there's also this desire for there to be a lot of personality in the home, whereas before there was not. So as I mentioned, color transforms. There's a reason that when we're in an incredibly joyous time in our life or an incredibly difficult time in our life, we think about changing the color of our home or our bedroom. Also, we think about changing the color of our hair. It's not uncommon for people to change their color when they're going through a transformative time in their lives to react to things like that. And of course, like I mentioned, color transforms. So people are attracted to this for happy times and negative times as they try to change and embrace our ever-changing world. So we're going to talk about the learning objectives for today's All Hail the Hue. Our goal is to understand the science of color. And for many of you, this will be a refresher of color theory. But we're also going to lean into some other things as well, such as how lighting and human factors like biology and psychology affect color. And then we're going to explore some of the hot color trends like color drenching and hue layering. And then we're also going to work on some practical tips for you to create and play with color as a designer and how to build confidence with your consumer on color selection. And then finally, I am very excited to share with you the new color launches from Medallion Cabinetry. We have launched 10 new bright colors. I hope you find them inspiring, and hopefully after the seminar, you will have the confidence to play with the full range. So we're going to start with the science of color, how light, perception, and emotion shape what we see. So of course, we're going to talk about color theory, which many of you are very familiar with as you went to design school. And of course, even in grade school, we learned about color theory, but it's always good to have a refresher. Then we're going to talk about common terms like hue, saturation, value, and tint. Then we're going to talk about the psychology and biology of color. Now, this is an area where I do feel like people typically say to me, I learned a lot. I didn't think about the biology of color. And then light. We cannot discuss color without discussing light and how we view color and how that color is a reaction to light. So to start, we're going to talk about color theory. So of course, this is the foundation of the way we perceive color combinations. It's really the foundation of what helps artists, designers, and homeowners create palettes with purpose. So you see here the color wheel with the primary colors. And for those who don't remember, primary colors are the colors that cannot be mixed. So yellow, blue, and red. They cannot be mixed to create the color. They are the primary colors. Next, we have the secondary colors. This is mixing of two primary colors together. So this is where you get your green, orange, and purple. So mixing of red and blue to get purple, yellow and red to get orange, and then my favorite color, yellow and blue to get green. And then finally, we have our tertiary colors. These are created by blending the primary and secondary colors. So this is where you start to get your yellow oranges or your yellow greens or your red purples. And this is where we start to really play with the nuance of color. And then of course we have color harmonies. Complementary colors are colors across the color wheel. So they're opposite on the color wheel, and they typically have a lot of contrast. So I have an example here of Medallion's new Dijon yellow with the claret red wine color, and you can see there is a lot of contrast. Whereas the analogous colors are together on the color wheel. So they complement each other because they follow the harmony of the rainbow. So in this case, I have the succulent from Medallion and the Dijon, and you can see that that is not as contrasting because they're closer on the color wheel. And then finally, some terminology with the color components. So we're definitely talking about the hue today, and that is the pure color. So when we talk about hue, we're talking about all the colors in the rainbow: red, blue, yellow, green, and so on. And then we have, of course, saturation and brightness. And some people get a little bit confused about that. Saturation describes the vibrancy of the color, while saturation brings the vivid and low saturation to being a dull grayish. So you can see on the chart to the left, you can see the bright red all the way to the gray. Well, brightness, on the other hand, determines the overall lightness and darkness. So unlike getting to that muddy gray, what happens when you add darkness or black, it just keeps getting darker and darker until it becomes black. Again, some terms that you might need to understand as we go through this is tint, that's adding color plus white, so lightening up the color. Shade is color plus black. Tone is color plus gray, as we move along to different tones across one specific color. Saturation, as I mentioned, is the intensity of color. And then value is the lightness and darkness of color. So let's talk a little bit about the biology of color. Color is not just what we see. It's how our biology and brain work together to process light and assign meaning to it. Our bodies interpret colors in different ways. One is through our eye anatomy, which has a series of cones, 3 of them red, green, and blue, that are very light sensitive to the different wavelengths. With that, there are some people with color blindness, which we'll talk a little bit about. It's not just people who can't see color at all and see black and white or muddy brown. It's a little bit more nuanced than that, depending on the individual. Color perception, how our brain signals what we see as color and how we perceive it. And then finally, some variabilities like genetics and age. So to start, let's talk about the human anatomy of the eye. So we have 3 cones, like I mentioned, the red, blue, and green, and these work together to allow us to perceive color. However, some people have different genetic factors that may indicate how they see color. Another really interesting factor is that there is some gender differences. Women are more likely to have enhanced colors due to having 2 X chromosomes, and sometimes they have a 4th cone, which allows them to see even more in a wider spectrum of color. So when you have a wife and a husband, or 2 friends together, and the wife brings home 5 different colors of red, and the husband is like, why are you showing me this? This is all the same color. He's not seeing the nuances that she's seeing. She's definitely seeing the difference in color, but he's not. Also, there is some differences with light and dark eyes. Light eyes tended to bring in more light, whereas darker eyes tend to bring in more natural or neutral color tones. So light and dark eyes also can see color differently, which is why we often take color testing as product people and as designers to make sure that we're seeing color properly and to know where our deficiencies are. And then we have color blindness. A little bit of a personal story. My best friend and her family were visiting me, and my nephew was about 7 years old. And he and his sister were playing the game Slug Bug, where you call out a color of a VW bug and then you kind of hit each other in the shoulder. And my nephew kept calling out the wrong colors. And I turned to his mother when we were in the store and I said, "Do you think he's colorblind?" She's like, "No, he's just being silly." So I pulled out my phone and pulled up some color tests. And sure enough, he could not see the color blue. Now, he could see every other color. So like I said, there is differences in deficiencies. Typically, it's inherited from the mother, but to her, everything else seemed normal. And she doesn't work with color as closely as I do or as you do. So she just didn't notice it. She thought he was just being silly. And then, of course, there is perception and variability. So is our brain connecting what we're seeing with our eyes into our minds? So when light enters the eye and activates the red or green or blue cones of the retina, it's different for everybody. The wavelengths, the way the brain processes, blending the colors together to perceive them. So it's really interesting. Everybody's a little bit different. And then, like I mentioned before, there are some people who are genetically predisposed to look at and see color different. Like I mentioned, women often see more colors, but there's other factors like age. As we age, the lens of the eye naturally yellows, scatters more light, it can dull color. So it's always good to be aware of some of these deficiencies, but this is helpful for us in order to know when we're working with a client and we think we have this absolutely beautiful palette, and yet our customers are like, "I'm not seeing that orange. I'm seeing it as yellow. I've asked for orange." So just FYI that there are some differences as us as individuals. And then let's talk about the psychology of color. So there is lots of studies that have talked about how color invokes mood. For example, blue invokes calm and reliability. This is often why you see a lot of banks using this color for logos to create that sense of reliability. Green invokes peacefulness, restfulness, organic, natural feelings. Orange invokes vitality and sociability. Yellow, of course, reminds us of the sun, so we feel warmth, happiness, optimism. Red invokes passion, energy, and appetite, which is oftentimes when you see an advertisement for food, the red is really vibrant. It's because they're trying to make you hungry. And then we have purple, which invokes luxury, creativity, spirituality, and black. The feeling invokes elegance. We think of the little black dress, or drama as we think of white and black and how contrasting it can be. And then finally, we have white, which often evokes the feeling of clean, fresh, and modern, which is why we had this movement of white minimalism that came from Europe. Part of the reason for that is when you think about Europe, they are surrounded by homes and buildings that can be 700 years old, 500, where for us, most of our buildings are newer. Our country's only been around for approximately 250 years. And so we don't have that sense of history. That's why in the US, typically we continue to have some form of traditional. Whereas in Europe, it's surrounded by tradition. And so there's this push into modern. However, color is also a very, very personal experience. There's cultural and personal and emotional factors. For example, what is calming for one person may be cold to another. Also, if we're young and we're surrounded by a particular color and we have a very scary feeling or we feel very sick, similar to if you had some sour candies as a kid and then you got the flu, you associate that with being sick. Color can do the same thing. So you may not know why you hate a color or why you love a color, but it's really in your subconscious. So that also plays a part. Another thing to think about when we think about our customers is there's a human dichotomy we have to consider. As human beings, we cannot survive on our own. As soon as we're born, we're dependent on our parents, our families, our communities. And so there is a deep-rooted need for us to be accepted, cherished, and be part of a community. However, on the other side of that, there's a deep need to be individuals. So you have this push and pull of wanting to be accepted and wanting to personalize. So it's really interesting. And when I say the group could be colleagues. It could be a mom's group. It could be the country club. It could be a sports team. Whichever group that you want to associate with you matters to you. The boomers particularly, I've noticed have this need to conform and be accepted. This is where we get the term of keeping up with the Joneses. Whenever I'm on a plane and I sit next to somebody and they find out what I do, particularly in that older demographic, they'll immediately say to me, "Oh my God, can I show you my kitchen?" And they want reassurance that they have made good choices because it's really important to them that their peer group and that people think they made good choices. You have less of that as you get younger because groups aren't formed just in the real world. Millennials, Gen Z, they have online groups. So somebody who's really into maximalism might be in 3 or 4 Facebook groups and therefore are constantly being reassured about their decisions. So when you have a customer and you have this beautiful layout, these wonderful colors, and they start to pull back from it and start to show trepidation, that is that need for acceptance. So it's really important to reassure and understand some of the emotions they're going through. And then of course we have to talk about light and color, and very much one of the most difficult things that designers have to deal with when it comes to color, which is metamerism. So lighting changes everything, and we must test colors in context to avoid metamerism. Why the same color can look different? Of course, lighting makes an impact, daylight versus fluorescent. They emit different wavelengths and changes how we see color. And then metamerism is really how 2 samples might appear identical in one light and then completely different under a different light. For example, it matches in the showroom, it does not match in daylight. A good example of this is if you've ever been in a store and you have bought a top that is black and pants that are black, but they're made out of different materials because material can play a role in this. So say your t-shirt is cotton and polyester and your pants are linen, perfect black match in the showroom or in the store. And then you walk outside and you look down and you're like, "Oh my God, my t-shirt's navy blue and my pants are black." That is an example of metamerism. Here's just kind of an example. You can see this at the rooftop, the fluorescent light versus the LED or the daylight look. You can see how different that light casts and how that's going to change how you perceive color. Also, like I mentioned, materials. So here you have a pink made out of flower petals, paint swatches, and fabrics. They're all very similar, but they will look very different. Here's just another example of a mood board showing how that material does change how we see color. And then finally, we have simultaneous contrast. Why the same color can look different when surrounded by other materials. So an example of this is our Dijon door with our succulent green color and our orchid with the succulent color. You can see here how different succulent looks based on the color that it surrounds. There's a lot of tests for this. You can see this with the black and the pink and the gray and how it starts to look green with the pink, and then the differences between the teal and the green with the red dots. So how do we avoid color surprises? Well, it's always important to test color in context. So surround yourselves with the right finishes, the right lighting environment, large samples, use them whenever possible, and then also compare the colors in both natural and artificial light. And then finally, be aware of how gloss can intensify or subdue a color. So for example, if you're designing a bathroom and the finish that you have is matte, but then what you're ordering is actually a higher gloss, know that is going to change the color appearance. So now we get to talk about some hot color trends. I hope that within the science of color, you learned a little bit, maybe something new that you hadn't learned before. But now we get to really talk about what's bold, expressive, and some of the sophisticated layering that's going on. As homeowners start to seek more color, it allows for these really immersive applications, and it allows you to get creative and bolder with your designs. So we're going to start by talking about color drenching. I know most of you have heard that term before. And then we're going to talk about double drenching, which is the coordinating of two tones, one often a shade darker or a shade lighter. And then two-toned and three-tone kitchens. I know we've been in the two-tone for a while, but we are seeing a rise in the three-tone kitchens. And then hue layering, how that's different than double drenching. So to start, we're going to talk about color drenching. So here's a picture that I took at the furniture show. This is a great example of it. It's the Oxford blood color, where you have the red around the fireplace and the wall. So you're really immersing. Some people would even color the shelf. You'll notice even the molding, the crown molding at the top is also painted the same color. So that is creating that really bold, expressive, mood-rich space. And then also here's another home. Here you can see the ceiling, the cabinets, and the wall color along with the moldings are all the same color, really, really creating this intense immersive experience. Off to the right, you have an entry as well. So you can see here that you have the ceiling, the shiplap, the cabinets, the walls, all the same color, really leaning into this really popular style of color drenching. And then we have the double drenching. So sometimes we see even now triple drenching. And this is where you have the same color, but in a variety of shades. So you add a little bit more black to a brighter color to create something a little bit more grounding, but it's really layering of the same color. So this kitchen off to the right, you see a really good example of the double drenching with some material. So you have this beautiful green color that's on the cabinets and on the hood, but then you have this tile material that has that matching color, but also some gradient within it as well, to create this sense of light and dark in this double drenching. And here's another example. Here's a bathroom with the wall color and the vanity color being black, and then the marble in the shower being a black tone, but really creating a different experience. And then finally, we have hue layering. And you might say, well, what's the difference? Well, hue layering is working within multiple shades within the same color family. It can be one tone, like, for example, the green that you see here, that's a little bit more in that teal color, and then more of a light pistachio color, and then something that's a little bit more like blue-green. So it's really layering those different color tones within that color family together. It can be done with textiles as well. This image off to the left, it's a little bit hard to see, but those are two colors of blue. So you have the darker blue-green color, and then you have the lighter blue-green color to really create that hue layering effect. They are not the same though. One is a little bit bluer in color, and that's the darker, and one's a little bit greener, and that's the lighter. And then of course, two-tone kitchens have been around for a while. I do love seeing it with these moodier, darker color palettes. So here's a good example of Nordic Noir. That's a really popular trend right now, where we have the very black, dark cabinets and hood with a grounding element, which is that beautiful wood island. Here's another example of two-toned with a brighter color green island that really creates that two-tone kitchen look. And then finally, of course, the difference of the uppers and lowers. More of a warm honey with a dark brown. So this has been around for a while, and this is a place where a lot of the mainstream are becoming very comfortable. And then three-tone kitchens. So with the return of some of these more traditional styles, especially something like a generational farmhouse, where people are trying to design houses that look like they've been lived in. So imagine a house where the stove is put in by your grandmother, the cabinets are put in by your mother, and then you put in the island. So they all work together but are slightly different style. We're seeing this uptick. Also, the return of some of these reimagined mid-century modern 70s palettes mixing together to create these really fresh looks. So loving to see these warmer color tones return, these new honey tones, and also a lot of shades of green. So let's talk a little bit about color confidence. So you as a designer have a lot of color choices, and I know that it's exciting to really design with color, but when you're starting out, you might have a little bit of paralysis with it. So start where you feel inspired. Layer color with intention, use wood tones for grounding, pick out patterns that can really inspire you. So I want to provide you with some simple tips to build confident, balanced palettes. So number one, I recommend you take inspiration from nature. Mother Nature is never wrong. She is an artist in herself, and she creates the most beautiful palettes that you can imagine. Layer from light to dark. This will add some depth, and we'll get into a little bit more of how to do that with cabinets, accents, floors to create depth and balance. Ground bold colors with wood tones. You saw that with the black kitchen with that beautiful wood island. This will help ground and balance, so we'll go through that. Pattern play, if you're not sure where to begin, a textile, a tile, or wallpaper, typically you're attracted to a color there, but it can inspire you to pull other tones. And then also follow the tonal shift. We are in a warm tone right now. Be aware of what's trending, even though your customers or region may not be there yet. Your customers are a little bit more savvy. They've seen some of this online, so be prepared to talk about that. And then we'll talk about the 10-30-60 rule when designing with color. So let's start. Where to start? Nature. Nature knows color harmony. It's never wrong, whether it's ocean blues and sandy beiges, cactus greens and desert rusts, floral purples and leafy greens. This is a great place to start to build timeless natural palettes. So I've included an image here of a beautiful creekside in the fall, and then a kitchen pulling some of these colors. So we have this beautiful mid-tone green. We have this very natural wood tone that's bringing in some of those yellow hues with also the ceiling. And here's just another example, but from a different perspective. So we're looking at the desert. So here's a mood board that's pulling in that ocean sky, bringing in that terracotta rust color and some of those yellow colors for a fresher look. So if you don't know where to begin, start by picking a picture in nature that makes you feel something, because color, when you do it right, it makes you feel something. And then don't be afraid to pattern play. So this is a picture that I took at KBIS. This is a great example of how to pick up and then create a space. So the pattern in the back, it's actually birds. Very cool pattern, very retro. You can notice that they painted the ceiling orange to pull that color. Then they put the blue tile. They have the wood vanity for grounding. And then the flooring is, it's a little hard to see, but it is the light blue, the navy blue, and the white pulling in that color. So it really gives you a starting point. Here is the GE booth from that same trade show at KBIS 2025. You can see here that they pulled the colors from the tile patterns in the back. Also maybe took some inspiration from the wall coverings off to the left. They brought those colors forward grounding that pattern with the navy blue tile along with the wall cover, and then bringing those brighter colors, using them very simply in the lighting, and then also with the pull-out orange island. So really creative way. So it's good to be occasionally inspired by these patterns and then create your mood boards. Here's just another example that's a little bit more mainstream, where you're not bringing in quite so much color. So this is a good example as you pull in that navy blue that's in the backdrop along with the white and putting it into not only the walls, but the cabinets. So pulling that navy blue from the backdrop of the pattern forward into the cabinets, and then pulling that light beige color from the flowers onto the walls, and then grounding it with a nice terracotta tile that brings in that warmth of that natural element like a wood would. Here's another example. The birds on the wallpaper, bringing them forward within the cabinet, and then blending in that marble, that Carrara marble with the walls with a little bit of a warm tone. And then, of course, grounding bold colors with wood tones. This is a great rule of thumb. Let wood be the anchor. So, for example, you have an example here in the bathroom where you have the dark forest green that's really popular, but then it's being muted or more naturally relaxed with this honey natural tone of the wood. It softens and warms up the space. Here's another example with a much more vibrant blue. And you can see how that saturated blue would be a little overwhelming if you didn't have that rich mid-tone brown cabinet to balance it. And then layer from light to dark. So when trying to create depth, if you don't know where to begin, and this is all rules are meant to be broken as we move forward and get more creative with design, but this is a great place to start. So this example that you see here, you have the light in the foreground with this nice creamy taupe color. You have the very dark cabinets. You have the mid-tone wood in both the hood, the open shelving, and the floor, and then that green color for a really organic space that really creates this depth of color in a very natural way. Here's just another example where you have that creamy tiled wall with the very dark black cabinets and the mid-tone wood, again, to create a lot of visual interest. I love this. I think it nods a little bit to a sophisticated Nordic noir with some more traditional elements. And then here's another example of a lighter palette. So you're using your dark color in the wood beams and the floor, and then you're having your mid-tone be that very light wood that's on the skirt and the island. And then finally, you have the white as your light tone. And here's just one last example with your dark color being the navy blue. You have your dark wood flooring and also pulling some of that color from the chairs. And then you have your Carrara marble and, of course, your white painted walls and ceilings. And then follow the tonal shifts. We are in a time of warm, earthy tones. Green has become popular, and with that has been the shift into these warm, creamy whites and these taupes. So be aware of the shift. Even if your area is not quite there and they're still leaning into the grayish, or you have a lot of customers who truly love blue, don't worry, blue is not going anywhere. Blue works beautiful with sandy colors. And as you're designing, think about the through view. So what I mean by that is within a hallway or passageway, what you can see beyond. So this is a good example of a through view where you have the tub with the dark emerald green, and then you have the room itself where the vanity is. So thinking about that through view and how they work together. That green works really beautifully with the beige wall and then that richer, warmer wood tone. Here's another example. I'm looking through to the butler's pantry and combining that black. So you're having a consistent color view, which is something that a lot of customers like. However, others like something that's more of a pop. So this image that you see here, the through view, is a bathroom, but a very bold color and pattern wallpapering and wall covering off to the back, but it works really well within the rest of the room. And then the 60-30-10 rule. So I absolutely love this room scene. This is the new medallion room scene, honoring some of our new colors, the claret and our palette, or excuse me, claret and our petal. You can see here that we are following this rule pretty closely. 60%, you have the dominant color, which can be the walls, a large surface like the cabinetry that you see here. Then you have your grounding element, which is your secondary color, which we're using here in the island, which is the 30% of the room. And then finally, you have the 10% accent, which could be, in this case, we're using it as a prep station or a coffee bar, but it's really thinking through how to use that 60-30-10. It tends to bring so much harmony and creates a really intentional feel. So let's talk a little bit more about color confidence when we're talking about clients. So turning uncertainty into confidence. So we have a lot of nervousness sometimes with customers. And so we really need to think through and make sure that we're giving them what they need to feel confident and not feel color overwhelmed. So some of the ways we can do this is start with emotion, not color, finding out what colors energize them. Sometimes you can gauge this based on what your client's wearing because they typically will wear their favorite colors. However, that being said, I do have a friend who wears strictly black and her house is nothing but hot pink. So it doesn't always correlate. And then also narrow the field. So we don't want them to be overwhelmed with choices. They're there because they know you're the expert, they trust you, and they want your help to guide them into their selections. Use anchors and grounding elements. It could be a fabric, a countertop, a favorite cabinet finish to build the palette. Lean into nature. If there's ever a fear, show them a picture of nature because nature never clashes. And it'll encourage clients to lean into that design because it feels familiar. And then show, don't tell. I know that all of you have the ability to really imagine a space, but not everybody does. Additionally, humans have really poor color memory compared to other animals. And so when we're talking about color, we may not be pulling from our memory the right color. And then sometimes it helps, and now's the time as we're embracing color to create a focal point, which really creates that wow moment that draws the eye. And then, of course, we have to normalize their fear because everybody has trepidation when they're trying something new. It's creating that confidence and creating that long-term satisfaction. So let's design with feeling first. So imagine this client wants a place that reminds them of being out in nature, something peaceful. Here's an example of something that you could create and offer that has that green, which really sends that sense of calm, that peace, that nature, and then pulling in some of those other grounding elements like the dark brown and the hood. But if you don't know where to begin, ask a client how they want to feel in the space. Find out what their emotional goals are. Do they want to feel energized? Do they want to feel refreshed? Do they want to feel cozy? And then use color temperature and contrast to kind of figure out where they land. Then curate the palette. So imagine this customer really wants pink. They know they want some form of pink. So here we have made 3 color choices using a form of pink. And they may very much decide that, ooh, blue's not for me. I would really prefer this first one with the green and the white. Or they may really only want one color, like you see off to the right with that petal pink surrounded by that absolutely stunning pink Carrara marble. So limiting to 1 and 2 options really will help them avoid analysis paralysis. And even if they don't pick something from this top 3 here that you've curated, you'll be able to get insights on what direction to go next. And really creating these palettes that are really beautiful make it easier for clients to feel confident about their decisions. So another option is to build from a beloved element. So start with one key material. In this case, we're going to talk a little bit about this navy blue cabinet finish that you see off to the left. Anchor the design and create harmony from that base. And then that kind of helps ensures the cohesion. So here you can see within this palette, we really pulled from this blue element, and then we surround it with some of these whites and these warmer tones so that your eye is drawn to that. Here's another example, but in this case, we're leaning into this tile in terms of the pattern and pulling colors and styles that play incredibly well with this. So this is a great way to start too. If there's a particular pattern or tile they're in love with, maybe a marble, you can start there and create the palette. Finally, here's one last example where you are using the fabric to create something that is really inspirational. Here they have the birds in the pattern, and you can see here we've added the terracotta to create more of that earthy, natural feeling. And then, like I mentioned before, nature never clashes. For customers who are still looking for that warm and cool tone together, nothing wrong with that. The ocean is a cohesion of warm and cool with that sandy warmth and those deep blues. Here's an example, very coastal in style that you can see here where we're combining that very sandy, natural or almost bleached floor with a really pretty blue to create this sense of ocean. And then show, don't tell. So use mood boards, photos, samples, swatches. It really helps the client imagine. Also, try to bridge the gap. So do as much sketching, 3D rendering if you can, to really let them understand what they can expect based on the design beyond just the mood board. It really helps to bridge the gap. And then design the wow. So this is the time, will not always be like this, where people are embracing color. They want that wow factor. So this is the time where you guys get to be creative. It's really exciting, whether it's an island, a backsplash, or playing with color. Now's the time. And there's different ways to create that wow factor. In this image you see out to the left, we're really looking at the saturated versus soft. So that really vibrant claret color, that's a really rich wine. And you can see your eye is being drawn to that lighter element in the middle, which is the hood. And then, of course, there's light versus dark. So in this case, your eye is being drawn to the desk in the back and all of that cabinetry, and it's very contrasting and it pulls the eye. And you can also do that with warm versus cool. So in this case, you have a cool gray. It's a dark cool gray, but it is a cooler color, and paired with that fireplace and chimney, which is a natural warm color, and that pulls your eye. Here's just a few more examples, because one thing we want to avoid is too many wow factors. It can dilute the focal point and feel a little overwhelming. So make sure that you support with a cohesive palette and really focus on one or two elements that are the focal point. There's lots of ways to do that. One way you're seeing here is using a framing technique. This can be done through color blocking. It can be done through contrast. This framing you see here can be done with paint that really create something unique. Also, lighting or a bold pendant can draw the eye. Archways, so working with shape to pull interest, and those architectural details. Here's an example at the end where you're using texture. That hood is really what's pulling your eye along with the texture and the light pendant. So using that to naturally pull your gaze. So these are just some examples of the ways that you can create wow factors. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with to create that, especially now that customers are embracing. And then finally, contrasting with some textures. So here you can see your eye is being drawn to the wood tone. In the next image, you can see your eye is being drawn to the backsplash on the stove. So your eye is being drawn to that pattern. And then finally, you can see here where your eye is being drawn to that very, very rich wallpaper. So can't wait again to see what you guys come up with to create this visual interest. And then finally, we just need to normalize the fear. It's okay to be overwhelmed. We deal with kitchen and bath design every day. Your customers may be doing this once, twice in a lifetime. It's a little bit overwhelming. So we just need to normalize that fear and creating the visuals to help them understand and help them see their vision come to life. So you have a mood board off to the left, and you can see how that interpreted into the kitchen, into this absolutely beautiful space. So acknowledging that the hesitation is normal, explaining how color cohesion brings in different feelings and emotions and can create personality or peace. And then reassure them that a well-planned palette is always worth it. So this is a time where they can create something that they truly love. And that's your goal, is to create emotion. Like I mentioned in the beginning, color equals emotion. The right palettes make you feel something. And that's what you will accomplish with your clients. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation today. Love talking about color. I'm excited to answer any of your questions. But before we go, I wanted to share with you the biggest medallion color launch that we have ever done. I hope some of these colors inspire you, and I would love to see what you come up with for your projects.
Thank you so much, Tressa. What a wonderful presentation. We appreciate you taking the time to share all of that information with us. Now we are going to get into some Q&A. We have a few questions here.
So I'll start off with the first question that we received from Claudia. She said, I have read that yellow brings out aggression. Is there anything to this?
There is a little bit to that. That is true. That there is a reason that we also use orange for warning, because it is a color that we have a reaction to. It can be joyful and energizing, like I mentioned, but it can also be but it depends on the hue. Like, that matters. Like, what is the intensity of the yellow? If you were to draw it down to a softer yellow, that's where you get into your sunshines and your flowers that are much more of those happy colors. So really depends on that intensity.
Perfect. Our next question is, do you see the three-tone trends mainly staying with warmer tones, or do you see some of those options with cooler tones as well?
I do see it with cooler tones. Everything cycles around. And like I mentioned before, there is emotion within color. So there may be somebody who truly loves those cooler tones. So I expect to see that layering happen. I still think you're going to have a wood tone in there that's going to ground that and add a touch of warmth.
Perfect. And then kind of touching on how colors can be specific to different customers. Someone asked, what strategies do you recommend for discussing with customers bold color options? Maybe the customer wants the bold color because it's trendy, but
Mhm.
maybe it's not going to last several years, as you were discussing. Do you have any strategies on discussing that, or how to bring that in on a smaller scale?
For sure. So that's a fantastic question. One of the great things is the personal relationship that you build with your client as you build trust. So you can have the conversation of how this color will have a lasting effect. So talk about timelessness. Talk about how that if they do get color overwhelmed in the future, how you can change it out. So there's great ways to talk about making it the focal point that then you can shift out. For example, maybe you paint a wall that draws the eye, put it in the butler's pantry for the through view, and then kind of talk through how can we use this color in a way that is surprising and truly you. So really lean into the fact that they want to be special. So using the color in special ways, like convince them that this little bit over here is what makes it special.
Perfect. And I know there's going to be some overlap with this next question,
Sure.
but someone asked, with kitchens being a 5+ year generational commitment, what ways do you assist customers with making their decisions when they may feel pressured to keep it safe? So on the opposite end of the spectrum
Mhm.
there.
Yeah, so one of the things that you can do to make them feel a little bit more safe is actually to just think about the door styles. So think about those transitional door styles if you're pushing into a color range. Also, like I mentioned, wood is always going to be timeless. So talking them into like maybe that the lowers being wood or the island being wood as that grounding element that's going to give it that longevity. Because like we mentioned, nature is never wrong.
I love that. And I like how you're tying that into bringing it back there as that starting point and then going from there. Our final question that I see here today is, are there specific color palettes or tones that work best for color drenching in small versus large spaces?
That is a great question. So in the smaller spaces, I would go mid-tone. I wouldn't go as dark because that will make the space feel a little bit smaller. Whereas the larger spaces, the darker colors really play into that space and create that sense of drama. But you don't want people to feel claustrophobic with those dark colors. So like a mid-tone would be a lovely choice.
And would you say, I'm guessing windows and lighting, that all has to be taken into consideration as well
Of
into how
course.
big it feels?
Of course. And how much natural light the room gets, of course.
Amazing. We have a lot of people talking about the presentation and how much they enjoyed it. So it will be online for everybody. We'll send you the link after this presentation. We do have some more questions coming in, if that's all right, Tressa. Someone
Happy to answer.
asked, yeah, what sheen cabinets do you typically recommend in design for bright colors?
So I recommend like a very low gloss, not a complete matte because you don't want the fingerprints, right? So you have to be careful with that. So I recommend like a satin finish. Because that tends to work really well. And with that reflection that you get, that little bit of reflection, it can soften the color a bit so it's not nearly as intense.
That's amazing. Teresa also asked, do you have any suggestions for renters on how to create fun color in a space that's not yours?
Yes, I do actually. So I have been seeing this like crazy. There's so many fantastic bloggers out there that really takes a rented space and reimagine it. And I love now that we actually have solid contact paper that's removable, so you can actually create that look of that paint without using paint.
I love that. So that's all the questions that we have for today, Tressa. So before we leave, I wanted to see if you had any final thoughts that you wanted to share with our audience today.
I would love to. So, the medallion palette that we are incredibly proud of, I'm really excited to share that with you guys. The thing to note about that is that all of the colors have the same amount of gray in it. So even though they're a broad spectrum of colors, the idea was to allow you as designers to mix and match colors that you wouldn't traditionally do. So we were really hoping to give all of you so much ability to be incredibly creative with your colors.
Perfect. And we'll make sure that you guys are linked to all of that and you're able to take a look at all the things that Cabinet Works Group has coming out. Thank you again, Tressa, for taking the time to share this information with us. And a big thank you to our wonderful audience. Until next time, I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you guys. Have a great day.